It's 2,000 years ago. You're squatting behind a bush somewhere. You have just finished the most universal act in all of human biology. And now comes the moment. The moment every single human who has ever lived has had to face. The moment they don't put in the history books, they don't paint on the walls of museums, and nobody ever asks about. You have to clean up. And there is no toilet paper. There is no toilet paper anywhere on Earth. Not in Rome, not in Greece, not in Egypt. It does not exist. It will not exist for over 1,000 years. So what do? What did ancient humans actually use as toilet paper? Now I know what you're thinking, because it's what everybody thinks, and it's what your face is doing right now. You're thinking, their hand? Please tell me it wasn't their hand, and I'm going to be straight with you. For a huge portion of humanity, the answer was water and the left hand. And here's the twist I want you to sit with for the next 20 minutes, because it flips this entire video on its head. That is not the gross answer. That is arguably the clean answer. Billions of people alive right now, across the Middle East, South Asia, and much of Africa, still clean with water. And if you ask them, they'd tell you that smearing yourself with a dry piece of paper and calling it finished is the barbaric option. There's an entire hygiene philosophy behind it that goes back thousands of years. And honestly, most doctors would side with the water. So no, the hand is not the horror story here. The horror stories are what everybody else came up with. And by the end of this video, you're going to know about a shared sponge on a stick that a man once used to kill himself. A wiping stick that solved a 2,000-year-old historical mystery about how disease traveled the Silk Road, and the fact that as recently as your great-great-grandparents' lifetime, people were pulling splinters out of places you do not want splinters. Because toilet paper, as you know, it is younger than the airplane. If you appreciate this type of content, gently tap that like button. It really does help this channel. Here we go. All right, let's start with the civilization everybody thinks was the most advanced in the ancient world. Rome. Aqueducts. Concrete. Roads so good you can still drive on some of them. Underfloor heating. And a toilet situation that will make you deeply uncomfortable. Picture a Roman public latrine, because it looks nothing like what you're imagining. There's no privacy. None. It's a long stone bench running around the walls of a room, with keyhole-shaped holes cut into it, and people just sit there, shoulder to shoulder, 10, 20 of them, chatting, doing business, making deals, complaining about the price of bread. There are no stalls, no doors, no partitions. The Romans simply did not have our hang-ups about this. Under the bench, a channel of running water carries everything away, and in front of your feet, there's a second, shallower channel of clean running water. That little channel is the important one, because that is where you rinse the thing. The thing is called a tersorium, or, if you want to use the Greek-derived word, a xylospongium. And it is simply a natural sea sponge tied to the end of a wooden stick. You use it. You rinse it in the water channel, or in a bucket of vinegar or salt water sitting nearby, which they'd figured out kept it from getting completely foul, even though they had no idea germs existed. And then you put it back. For the next person, yeah, the same sponge. In a public latrine. In a city of 1 million people. Now, I want to be honest with you here, because this is where most videos on this topic stop. And I think the truth is more interesting. There is a real scholarly fight about the sponge. Some researchers now argue the sponge on a stick wasn't for wiping at all, and was actually closer to a toilet brush, used for cleaning the latrine itself, and that the Romans wiped with something else. Because when the archaeologist Mark Robinson examined an ancient sewer in Herculaneum, the town buried alongside Pompeii, he found scraps of cloth down there, rags, which suggests plenty of Romans were wiping with fabric and tossing it away, like a disposable wipe. There's even a Roman fresco from Ostia, with an inscription that essentially involves someone being told to use the sponge on the stick, while other people use water. 2,000 years ago, they were already arguing about the correct method. Some things never change. But we know at least one thing about the sponge for certain, and it's one of the darkest, strangest details in Roman history. The philosopher Seneca wrote about a Germanic gladiator, a man due to be sent out to die for the entertainment of a crowd. Before the show, this man was taken to the latrine, the only place he was ever left alone, and there, rather than be killed in the arena for other people's amusement, he took the sponge on the stick, and he used it to kill himself. Seneca told the story not as a horror, but as an example of a man choosing the only freedom he had left. That is how ordinary and everywhere this object was. It was so mundane, so present in every public bathroom in the empire, that it became an instrument of one of the most defiant acts in Roman history. And if the shared sponge sounds bad, wait until you hear what the Greeks were doing. The Greeks used pessoi. The word basically means pebbles, and in practice, pessoi were small, rounded, flat discs, often just broken pieces of pottery with the edges smoothed off. That's right, ceramic. You are scraping yourself with a piece of a broken plate. Archaeologists actually found these things for decades and assumed they were game pieces, like ancient checkers, until a study published in a medical journal took a closer look and concluded, no, these were absolutely being used to scrape yourself clean. And here's the detail that makes this my favorite fact in ancient history. In Athens, when the citizens wanted to exile someone, they'd vote by scratching that person's name onto a broken shard of pottery. Those shards were called ostraca. That is literally where our word ostracize comes from. Now, those shards after the vote were lying around everywhere. And scholars have suggested that some pessoi started life as ostraca, which means it is entirely possible that an ancient Greek, having voted to banish his political enemy, later took that very shard with his enemy's name scratched into it and wiped himself with it. That's not just hygiene. That is the pettiest, most magnificent insult in the history of the human species. So Rome had a shared sponge, and Greece had a broken plate. Which raises the obvious question, was anyone doing this better? And the answer is yes, and it's on the other side of the world, and the object they used ended up solving a historical mystery that had puzzled scholars for a century. In the far northwest of China, on the edge of the Taklamakan Desert, there was a relay station called Xuanquanji. Think of it as a service station on the Silk Road, a garrison and rest stop built by the Han Dynasty around 111 BC, where soldiers, merchants, officials, and travelers would stop, sleep, and, inevitably, use the latrine. It was in use for about 200 years. And when archaeologists dug out that latrine, they found sticks, wooden and bamboo sticks, wrapped with cloth at one end. These are personal hygiene sticks, sometimes bluntly called by a name I'll let you look up yourself. Wrap cloth around the end of a stick, and you have a wiping tool with reach. It's not a bad design. Versions of this show up across ancient China and Japan. Now here's where it becomes something much bigger than a bathroom story. Two researchers from Cambridge, Huiyuan Ye and Piers Mitchell, took those 2,000-year-old sticks and looked at the dried material still stuck to the cloth under a microscope, and they found eggs, parasite eggs, 4 different species of intestinal worm, roundworm, whipworm, tapeworm, and one more that changed everything. Chinese liver fluke. Here's why that matters so much. Chinese liver fluke needs a wet, marshy environment to complete its life cycle. It cannot survive in a desert, and Xuanquanji sits in one of the driest places in China, at least 500 kilometers away from the nearest region where that parasite can naturally exist. So that parasite did not come from there. It could not have, which means a human being carrying that parasite inside their body walked or rode more than 15,500 kilometers across China, arrived at this rest stop, used the latrine, and left the evidence behind on a wiping stick, where it sat for 2,000 years waiting for someone to find it. For 100 years, historians had assumed the Silk Road spread disease, plague, leprosy, all of it moving along the trade routes with the travelers. It made perfect sense. But it was an assumption. They had no hard proof. And then a scientist put a 2,000-year-old wiping stick under a microscope. And there it was, the first solid archaeological evidence that travelers physically carried infectious disease along the Silk Road. The single most disgusting object in the entire dig turned out to be the most important one. Ancient garbage is often worth more than ancient gold because nobody lies in a latrine. Quick break, and then we get to the part where somebody finally invents the thing. If you're enjoying this, check the description and the pinned comment below. I keep the sources and the good extra stuff down there so you can go dig into any of this yourself. Okay, so who invented toilet paper? Because somebody had to. And it was China. And they did it so long before everybody else that it's genuinely a little embarrassing for the rest of the world. Paper itself was being made in China as early as the 2nd century BC. But the first clear reference to using it in the bathroom comes from a scholar named Yan Zhetui, writing around 589 AD. And I love how we know this, because he didn't sit down to write about toilet paper. He wrote a line about how he would never dare use paper that had the words of the 5 classics or the names of sages written on it for toilet purposes. Think about what that sentence accidentally tells us. He's not saying nobody uses paper for that. He's saying I won't use the good paper for that, which means the practice was already normal. He wrote one respectful sentence about what he wouldn't wipe with, and 400 years later, it became the earliest recorded evidence of toilet paper on planet Earth. Then, in 851 AD, an Arab traveler visited China and wrote down his observations, and you can feel the culture shock coming off the page. He notes, with clear disapproval, that the Chinese don't wash with water after using the toilet. They just wipe themselves with paper. To him, this was the strange, unclean, uncivilized option. That's the same debate we started this video with, being had, in writing, over 1,000 years ago. And China went industrial with it. By the early 14th century, in what's now the Zhejiang region alone, records suggest around 10 million packages of toilet paper were being manufactured every year, with each package holding somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 sheets. That is mass production. That is an actual toilet paper industry, hundreds of years before Europe had any idea it was missing out. And at the very top, the Ming court in Nanjing was recorded in 1393 as receiving an annual supply of around 720,000 sheets, each one enormous, roughly 2 feet by 3 feet. And for the Hongwu Emperor's own family, a special supply of about 15 zeros and sheets made extra soft and perfumed. The Emperor of China had scented luxury toilet paper while European nobility were still reaching for a handful of straw. Which brings us to the most humbling fact in this entire video. It took the West roughly 2,200 years to catch up. 12 centuries. While China was pressing perfumed sheets for the imperial family, medieval Europe was using moss, hay, straw, leaves, wool, and rags, sorted, as always, by how rich you were. Wealthy, soft cloth. Poor, whatever grew nearby, and I know what you're telling yourself. That's the medieval period. That's ancient history. That's not us. Modern people have always had toilet paper. No. And this is the part that genuinely got me. In America, right through the 1700s and deep into the 1800s, and in rural areas well into the 1900s, one of the standard tools in the outhouse was the corncob. Dried, shelled corncobs, kept in a bucket. And people who actually used them, farmers writing about their own childhoods, will tell you the cobs were more comfortable than you'd guess, that you'd rub them to soften them, and that there were even preferred varieties, some cobs being gentler than others. There are first-hand accounts of grandfathers who simply carried a couple of corn cobs in their back pocket, the way you'd carry a phone. Then came paper, but not the paper you think. Americans wiped with newspapers, magazines, letters, and above all, the Sears Roebuck catalog. It was perfect. It arrived free every year at basically every rural household in the country. It was hundreds of pages of soft, uncoated newsprint. People hung it on a nail in the outhouse, where it did double duty as reading material and wiping material. And this practice was so universal, so completely standard, that when the Farmer's Almanac noticed everyone was punching a hole in their publication to hang it on that nail, they gave up and started pre-drilling the hole themselves, starting in 1919. That hole is still in the corner of the Farmer's Almanac to this day. It is a small, quiet monument to a century of American outhouses, and most people holding it have no idea what it's for. And there's a beautifully petty footnote here. When Sears eventually switched their catalog to glossy-coated paper, rural America was furious, because glossy paper does not work. It doesn't absorb. It just redistributes. There were complaints, real ones. A corporate printing upgrade caused a nationwide bathroom crisis. Commercial toilet paper did exist by then. A New Yorker named Joseph Gaetti started selling flat sheets in 1857, marketed as medicated paper for the water closet. 500 sheets for 50 cents, with his own name watermarked on every single sheet, which is a level of confidence I can only admire. Rolls came along with the Scott Paper Company around 1890. But here's the thing. For decades, ordinary people didn't want it. Why would you pay money for paper when the catalog shows up free and the corn grows in your own field? And I've saved the worst for last. Early manufactured toilet paper had a problem. The paper-making process left small splinters of wood in the finished sheets. Actual splinters in the toilet paper. This was such a well-known widespread issue that when the Northern Tissue Company finally solved it, their big advertising slogan, the thing they put on the packaging to sell the product, was that their toilet paper was splinter-free. And the year they did that was 1935. Sit with that. Splinter-free toilet paper is younger than sliced bread. It arrived after the telephone, after cars, after the airplane, after radio. There are people alive on this planet right now who are older than reliably splinter-free toilet paper. When your great-grandparents were young, this was a genuine selling point. So, what did ancient humans use as toilet paper? They used what was near them, and what was near them says everything about who they were. Rome, a civilization obsessed with public life, shared a sponge in a public room. Greece, obsessed with politics and grudges, used the ballot they'd cast against their enemies. Silk Road travelers used a cloth-wrapped stick and left behind a record of the diseases they carried across a continent. China, the great inventor, invented the thing 1,100 years before anybody else and started perfuming it. Rural America used what the farm gave it. Corncobs and the free catalog. And billions of people, then and now, simply used water and quietly thought the rest of us were disgusting. Here's the thought I want to leave you with. You've spent this whole video horrified at what these people did. But the soft, clean, splinter-free roll sitting in your bathroom right now is, on the scale of human history, brand new. Almost the entire human story happened without it. Every philosopher, every emperor, every pharaoh, every genius who built the pyramids and mapped the stars and wrote the books we still read, all of them figured this out with a leaf, a stone, a sponge, a stick, or their own hand and some water. They are not the weird ones. Statistically, across the whole span of our species, you are the weird one. You're the anomaly. You're living in the strange, soft, comfortable little bubble at the very end of a very long, very rough story. So my question for you, and please put this in the comments because I want to see the arguments. Knowing everything you now know, if you had to give up modern toilet paper tomorrow and pick one historical replacement to live with for the rest of your life, which are you choosing? The Roman sponge, the Greek pottery shard, the corncob, or the water? Choose carefully and defend it. I'll be reading. And if you want to know what these same people did when things went really wrong, when they got sick, when there were no doctors and no medicine anywhere on Earth, I made a whole video on exactly that. And you can watch it right here. I'll see you in the next one.